In my last video, I talked a lot about some of the most basic sound changes that happened as Latin evolved into the modern Spanish language. And in that video, I discussed syncope, apocope, and some consonant changes that occurred as Latin evolved into modern Spanish. And in this video, I'm going to continue talking about some of the sound shifts that have occurred that have contributed to the formation of modern Spanish. And I'll show you some words and examples of how Spanish compares to other languages and how they evolve differently when we go from Latin to Spanish. One sound that happened pretty early in the evolution of Romance languages, and it affects all Romance languages except for Sardinian as far as I know, is the softening of k and g sounds before an a or e vowel. In classical Latin, the c's and the g's are always hard. So if I have a word like sky, the word in classical Latin is caelum, caelum. That I sound, it over time evolved into an e, and now when I have a ke before an e, it became so soft or palatized over time that it shifted into a s sound in Spanish. The soft versions of the sounds aren't the same in every language. I believe in Romanian and Italian, it's a ch sound. In French, Portuguese, Spanish, it's a s sound. So that word for sky in classical Latin, which would be caelum, in Portuguese we have céu, in Spanish we have cielo, in Italian cielo, in French we have ciel, and in Romanian we actually have cer. So we can see how these C sounds really shifted pretty drastically from a k to a soft s or ch sound, depending on the Romance language in question. And another sound that does that is the g sound. The g sound also shifts from a hard g sound in Latin to a soft j sound before a or e vowels. And an example of a hard g sound, a hard g turning into a soft j sound, and again, the soft sounds in Romance languages change based on the Romance languages. We can have j, or in Spanish we also have h, okay? An example of a word that does that would be generatio, which means generation in English. In Portuguese we have geração. In Spanish we have generación. In French we have génération. In Italian we have generazione. And in Romanian it's generație. So you can see how all those words in each kind of main Romance languages that we're looking at, they become soft before an a or an e vowel, this g and this s sound. And that's a huge thing that changed between Romance languages as they evolved from Latin languages, because in classical Latin, again, the g and the k sound were always hard no matter what vowel sound they came before. Another common sound that affected mostly all Romance languages but did not affect Italian was the insertion of a kind of vowel before consonant cluster sounds with s. What I mean by that is we oftentimes see a shift in Latin from words that began with ska or sta or spa, and in the Romance languages besides Italian and also besides Romanian as well, they insert this kind of vowel before those sounds. So we can see in these Romance languages besides Italian and Romanian that they do insert this vowel sound before a consonant cluster that begins with spa or sta or ska. So a good example of a word that does that could be the word scribere, which means to write in Latin. In Portuguese you have escrever, in Spanish we have escribir, in French we have écrire, and then in Italian we have scrivere, and in Romanian we have scria. So you can see how Italian and Romanian do not add that kind of vowel sound at the beginning of the cluster. Another verb we can look at that does this thing is the verb studere, which in Vulgar Latin I think was reanalyzed, making a verb out of the noun study. So from studio we had studiare. So in the Romance languages we can see how this word evolves to insert a vowel before the initial sta sound. In Portuguese we have estudar. In Spanish we have estudiar. In French we have étudier. In Italian we have studiare. And then in Romanian we have the word studia. But that word is actually borrowed from Italian. It is not directly descended from Latin. But it should be said that I don't speak Romanian very well, but as far as I can see with when looking at Romanian, that Romanian does not generally insert a vowel before these initial S consonant clusters. One thing that I find pretty exemplary about Spanish is the use of diphthongs, these we and ye sounds. Italian and French have them as well, but not to such a high degree as Spanish does, and Portuguese doesn't have them at all. So the reason why that happened in the Spanish language was because in Latin we had not only long and short vowels, but we also had open and closed vowels. The distinction in Romance languages between long and short vowels is pretty much lost as far as I know in the Romance languages that I know. But the distinction between open and closed vowels is maintained in most Romance languages, but it's lost in Spanish. So in a lot of Romance languages, there is a kind of classical Latin 7-vowel system, which means a, e, I, o, u, okay? But in Spanish, we just have a, e, I, o, u. There's only 5 vowels. So a reason we have these ye and we sounds so often in Spanish as compared to Italian or French, and then there's none in Portuguese, is because the context in which it happens is slightly different. In Spanish, no matter whether it is open or closed, the e or the o vowel, as long as it was a short vowel in Latin, it became diphthongized in Spanish. As opposed to Italian and French, where those sounds only became diphthongized when they were open vowels like e and o. So that's how we can see such a distinction in a word like porta in Latin, which means door, and then in Spanish we have puerta, right? But then in French we have port, in Italian we have porta, and in Portuguese we have porta. An example of a word that does have a diphthong in Italian, Spanish, and French because of the quality of the vowel being open could be an example of a word in Latin like ferus. Ferus means ferocious. In Spanish we have fiero, in Italian we have fiero, and then in French we have fier. So we can see how the diphthong becomes diphthongized in all those languages because of the quality of the vowel. The quality of the vowel is open and not closed. So this is why when we look at stem changing verbs in Spanish and Italian to a much smaller degree, this is why they stem change in certain positions and don't stem change in other positions. Like they always stem change in the present tense in first, second, third singular and third plural, but not in first plural and second plural. So for example, if I have a verb like dormir, then in the first, second, third I have duermo, duermes, duerme, and then I have dormimos, dormis, and duermen. The reason why is because the stress changes, right? I have duermo, duermes, duerme, and then dormimos, dormis, and duermen. So the diphthongization doesn't happen on unstressed syllables. It only happens on stressed syllables. So that's why when I have these stem changing verbs, they don't stem change on first plural and second plural because the stress is changed from the vowel sound and it's kicked back to the syllable that comes after that. So these 3 changes that we saw today going from Latin into Spanish, 2 of them I would say are pretty common and they affect most Romance languages. And then that last one we saw is something that I think is very specific to Spanish, and it gives it a kind of distinct sound with these ye and we sounds, which are absent from Portuguese and much less common in French and Italian. There are still a lot of concepts to talk about moving from Latin to Spanish, so I'm going to talk about those in future videos. And I would love to know some things that you guys have questions about comparing Romance languages, like why is one word this in one language and why is this word this in another language? Why do sounds change in different languages? Because this is really what I study and it's kind of a specialty of mine. And I'm going to come out with another video addressing more changes going from Latin to Spanish next week. So I'm going to be coming out with a new video every Friday. Right now I'm focusing on historical Romance languages. And to see these videos coming out every Friday, subscribe to my channel, Mapa Mundi Language.